I smelled it before I saw it. Sweet, warm, thick in the air like a memory I wasn't sure was mine. Vanilla, maybe cinnamon. It clung to the hallway wallpaper, curled under my bedroom door, and wrapped around my chest like a blanket that didn't belong to me. I sat up slowly, blinking against the weak morning sun that filtered through my broken blinds. The house never smelled like this. It was usually stale, bleach and dust, maybe burnt coffee on the good days. I checked my phone. April 4th, my 18th birthday. I pulled on an old sweatshirt and padded down the hall, bare feet against cold linoleum. The scent grew stronger as I turned the corner into the kitchen. And there it was. A cake. No icing. Just a round golden sponge cake resting awkwardly on a wire rack like it didn't know what it was doing there. And behind it, my mother, Diane Monroe. Hair in a frizzy bun, wearing a faded apron I'd never seen her use in my life. She didn't turn around when I entered, just stood there, stiff and still, hands clutching the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Happy birthday," she said flatly, still not facing me. I stared at the cake. She never cooked, not on Thanksgiving, not on Christmas, not even when I won the regional spelling bee in 5th grade. Back then, she'd handed me $20 and said, "Don't let it go to your head." That was her love language, transactional and cold. "Thanks," I mumbled, stepping closer, half expecting this to be some weird hallucination. No candles, no frosting, no note, no warmth, just the cake. "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. "In the den," she replied without turning. Then she picked up a sponge and began scrubbing an already clean spot on the counter. Something was off, not just unusual, off. I felt it in my gut, the way you sense a thunderstorm before the clouds roll in, but I didn't say anything. I sat at the table, staring at the cake like it might blink. That was the longest morning of my life. I didn't leave the kitchen. I didn't touch the cake. Diane didn't speak to me again. She cleaned, she vacuumed the hallway. She wiped down picture frames like we were expecting guests. We weren't. At one point, I heard my dad, George Monroe, pacing upstairs, his footsteps measured, then the familiar creak of his office chair. He was always in that chair, reading the paper, making calls, donating money to things that didn't involve me. By noon, the house felt like it was vibrating with a silence I couldn't explain. And at 2:04 p.m., the tremor turned into a quake. "Callie," George called from the living room, his voice sharp and clipped. Not angry, just official, like he was about to deliver a verdict. I stood, legs heavy, and walked in. He was sitting in his recliner, one ankle crossed over his knee, a glass of scotch in hand. The news played quietly on the TV behind him, muted. Diane was on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression drawn tight. "Sit down," he said. I did, slowly. Nobody looked at me. George cleared his throat. "We've got something to tell you." My stomach coiled. He didn't pause, didn't soften his tone. "You're not our biological daughter." Diane's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She looked at her lap like it had all the answers. "What?" I asked, though I already knew. "You were placed with us when you were 2, George said, adjusting the cuff of his shirt like this was a business meeting. "Your birth mother couldn't care for you. We agreed to foster you, and we made it work. Made it work. Like I was a houseplant they forgot to water but kept alive out of guilt." "You've been with us a long time," Diane said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were flat, empty. "But now that you're 18, it's time for you to start your own path." I blinked. My fingers curled around the hem of my sweatshirt. "We've arranged for you to stay at the Elmridge Hostel downtown," George added. "Just until you find a job. There's money in the bag. A few essentials." "What bag?" I asked, though my voice didn't sound like mine. He bent forward and reached under the couch, pulled out a forest green duffel, unzipped just enough to reveal clothes and what looked like an envelope. It slid across the carpet like it was meant to glide, like this had been rehearsed. "You're serious," I said quietly. Neither of them answered. "You're kicking me out," I clarified. "It's not like that," Diane offered weakly. "It's exactly like that," I said, standing slowly. The bag handle felt rough in my hand. I looked at them. Neither moved. No tears, no regret. not even curiosity about how I felt. They had already decided what role I played in their story, and the story was over. "Thank you," I said softly, smiling, "for everything." They didn't reply, and they didn't notice. Didn't notice the way I gripped the strap tight enough to hurt. Didn't notice the flicker in my eyes. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I already knew. 3 weeks ago, I found the file. Not under a mattress, not in a drawer. It was taped beneath the floorboard under the hallway radiator, slipped between insulation and dust like someone had meant to hide it forever. But I found it, by accident. I dropped an earring, reached down to grab it, and my fingers caught the edge of something paper. A manila folder, crinkled, labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, a birth certificate, my name. Lena Marchand listed as mother, no father, no adoption records, just a sticky note attached to the front, property of St. Edda Institute. I'd Googled the name until my eyes burned, then I stopped Googling and started printing, started writing things down, started asking questions, quietly. Lena wasn't some dropout or drug addict who gave me up. She was a psychiatrist, a whistleblower, a woman who'd tried to expose unethical practices at a mental health institution and was subsequently admitted herself, institutionalized, silenced. And now, as I walked down the porch steps of the house I'd lived in for 16 years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt unleashed. The Elmridge hostel was just as grimy as the Yelp reviews had warned. The front desk clerk barely glanced up when I checked in with the prepaid card George had left me. The room smelled like mildew and floor cleaner. The mattress was thinner than a sandwich. The ceiling tiles were water-stained, and the radiator hissed like it resented being alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, duffel bag at my feet, and pulled out the file again. Ran my fingers over Lena's name. I didn't know what had really happened to her yet. But I would. I would find her. I would ask the questions George and Diane never wanted me to ask. Because I wasn't just a foster kid they forgot to love. I was someone's daughter. And someone had tried very hard to make sure I never found out who. The first night at Elmridge Hostel was like sleeping inside an echo. Everything hummed, faintly, mechanically. The radiator in the corner coughed every 30 seconds. The fluorescent light in the hallway buzzed through the doorframe. My bed springs creaked every time I shifted my weight. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I just sat on the bottom bunk, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the frayed edges of the duffel bag they'd sent me off with. I hadn't opened it since walking out of that house. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. 3 shirts, a pair of jeans, a travel-sized toothbrush, a manila envelope with 5 $20 bills, and a sheet of lined paper that read, "Make smart choices, George." I almost laughed. Instead, I picked up the other envelope, the one they didn't know I had. The one I found taped beneath the floorboard. The one labeled Marchand L, confidential. I pulled it out slowly, like it might fall apart from being touched too much. Inside was the birth certificate, a hospital band with a faded barcode, and a Xerox copy of something I hadn't dared read yet. A disciplinary notice from a private medical board. But tonight, I had nothing else to lose. By sunrise, I was already walking. My shoes, cheap canvas flats, were soaked from the morning dew. I didn't have breakfast, couldn't afford to, couldn't risk spending even a single bill unless it was for something that mattered. The Garland Springs Public Library sat on the edge of Main Street, nestled between an abandoned post office and a thrift store that hadn't been open since before the pandemic. I used to come here when I was younger, before George got annoyed with the late fees and canceled my card. But the microfilm machine still worked, and the archive desk didn't ask for ID. I slipped in just as the doors opened, made a beeline to the back, and slid into a chair like I belonged there. The woman at the front desk didn't even glance up. Thank God for invisibility. The article was harder to find than I expected. Her name wasn't in the headlines. I had to dig. Through local health department scandals, hospital budget cuts, and 2 separate court cases involving the state psychiatric board. Then, there it was. October 14th, 2007. A front page in the Garland Springs Chronicle, the kind of paper that mostly covered ribbon cuttings and parades. But this was different. This headline was printed in bold, all caps. Whistleblower psychiatrist institutionalized after accusations against Tressman Clinic. I read the first paragraph once, then again, then a third time because it didn't feel real. Dr. Lena Marchand, 32, was taken into state custody late Friday evening after a public dispute with hospital administrator Dr. Miles Tressman. Marchand, a staff psychiatrist at the privately run Tressman Behavioral Institute, made headlines earlier this week when she accused the facility of violating ethical guidelines and performing unauthorized treatments on female patients. There was a photo. It stopped my breath. Lena was being escorted into a state vehicle, hands cuffed, her face pale. But her eyes were defiant, unflinching. She was wearing a lab coat, her ID badge still clipped to her pocket, her mouth slightly open like she'd just finished yelling. This wasn't a woman who'd lost her mind. This was a woman who refused to be silenced. I printed the article with trembling hands and folded it into my notebook. My throat was dry, but my pulse was alive. I sat back in the chair, staring at the page like it might answer the 1,000 questions rising in my chest. Why had she been taken? Why was she never heard from again? And how did I end up with George and Diane? I turned the page. At the bottom of the article, almost like an afterthought, was a quote from a spokesperson of the Tressman Foundation. "We are saddened by Dr. Marchand's unfortunate condition. Dr. Tressman and our board acted in full accordance with the law to ensure the safety of our patients and staff. Her claims were thoroughly reviewed and found to be baseless. We wish her a full recovery, like she was sick, like truth-telling was a disease." Back at the hostel, I laid everything out on the mattress. The article, the birth certificate, the medical notice, a printout of the Tressman Foundation's mission and values page. It was all smiles and buzzwords, healing, hope, community, but the deeper I dug, the more rotten it felt. Tressman wasn't just a name on the article, it was everywhere. There were wellness centers, community grants, even a scholarship fund for women in crisis. The foundation had chapters in 6 states and satellite clinics in 3 more. It had government contracts, private donors, and glossy marketing videos showing trauma survivors hugging therapy dogs. But buried in one of their older press releases, one from 2008, I saw a name I recognized: George Monroe, a founding donor, listed next to 3 others under legacy supporters. I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't coincidence. He didn't just adopt me. He didn't just raise me. He funded the very network that silenced my mother. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. I sat by the window of my hostel room, watching traffic lights blink over empty intersections, and tried to count how many lies my life had been built on. They told me my mother gave me up. They told me I was lucky, that they'd saved me, that I should be grateful. But now I saw it for what it was: control. They took me to silence her, to erase her name from every record, to bury her story with a nice family, a good home, and a carefully constructed narrative. And the worst part? It worked. For 18 years, it worked. By morning, I had a plan. I didn't know where Lena was, not yet. The article didn't say where she'd been taken, only that she was placed under state psychiatric supervision. That could mean anything. A dozen facilities, maybe more. But I'd start by tracing the Tressman Institute. If I could find out when it closed and where its patients were transferred, I could find her. I pulled out my notebook and started listing state hospitals, private long-term care facilities, and names mentioned in the article. I drew timelines, arrows, wrote down questions no one had ever answered. I didn't know what I'd find. But I knew this: I wasn't just going to disappear. I wasn't going to let them win. They took my mother's voice. Now I was going to make the whole world hear it. I spent the next 48 hours trying to trace a ghost. The Tressman Institute, the one my mother worked at, the one she was forcibly removed from, no longer existed. The website was gone. The building had been sold and repurposed, according to a zoning board record I dug up from 2013. There were no public lists of former patients, no case files, no digital footprint. It was as if someone had intentionally scrubbed it from history. But old institutions rarely disappear cleanly. There's always a paper trail, even if it's buried. I started calling Department of Health, local psychiatric registry, state archives, nonprofit records, hospital transfer logs, anyone who might know what happened to patients once the Tressman Behavioral Institute was shut down. Most of the people I reached didn't even know what I was talking about. Some had vague memories. Oh, that place upstate? But nothing concrete. Others transferred me endlessly between departments until I gave up. But then, on the third day, a soft voice answered from the Glen Ridge County Records Office. "Hello, Archives Division, this is Margaret speaking." Her voice had the weathered edges of someone close to retirement, someone who still believed in handwriting and phone calls over emails. I took a chance. "Hi, I'm looking for information on former patients of the Tressman Behavioral Institute, specifically transfers after its closure. I was told some may have been moved to a facility in Glen Ridge." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. Then, "Where did you get that name?" My pulse quickened. "I'm trying to find someone, Lena Marchand." Another pause. Then, "What's your relation?" "She's my mother," I said. "Or, she was. I was adopted when I was 2. I only found out recently. I need to find her." Margaret exhaled softly, like she'd just made a decision. "I can't say much over the phone," she said. "But there's a long-term psychiatric care center here, Ridgeview Center for Behavioral Health. It was opened in 2008, quietly. No website, no public listing. Some of the Tressman patients were moved there. I've seen the names. She might be one of them." My throat dried. "You're sure?" "I can't be," she said. "But if she's still alive, that's your best chance." It took me the rest of that day and night to figure out how to get to Glen Ridge. I had no car. The last of the cash from George's envelope was gone, eaten up by hostel fees, library printouts, and 2 cups of vending machine coffee. I counted the change in my pocket. $4.63. Bus fare to Glen Ridge was $28.50. It might as well have been a plane ticket. I sat on the sidewalk outside the library, notebook in my lap, trying to work out a way to make money fast without a social security number, references, or time. I didn't want to beg. I didn't want to steal, but I did want answers. Across the street, a faded red diner had a help wanted sign taped to the window. It fluttered in the breeze like a lifeline. I crossed without thinking. By some miracle, the manager, an old guy named Nate, took one look at the dark circles under my eyes and said, "You ever mop floors?" I nodded. "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m., cash tips, no complaints, no breaks. I worked for 5 days straight. No phone, no distractions, just scalding water, burnt fingers, and the constant ache of a back that had no mattress to rest on. I washed dishes, scrubbed toilets, picked up cigarette butts in the parking lot. And on the 6th morning, Nate handed me an envelope with $117 in crumpled bills and a nod that almost felt like approval. I was on the 10:40 a.m. bus to Glen Ridge 15 minutes later. The ride took 3 hours. The bus creaked along country roads, weaving through towns that looked half abandoned, where gas stations sat next to boarded-up churches and every house had at least one broken window. Spring hadn't come yet to this part of the state. Everything was gray and brittle and frozen in time. My fingers clutched the envelope with Lena's documents, folded carefully inside my jacket. Every bump in the road felt like a test of will. I didn't eat. I didn't look at my phone. I just stared out the window and tried to imagine what it would be like to finally see her, to look into her eyes, to ask if she remembered me. Ridgeview Center sat at the top of a winding hill, surrounded by skeletal trees and thick iron gates. From the outside, it looked less like a hospital and more like a forgotten mansion, a place where secrets went to die. The front entrance was a pair of heavy wooden doors, flanked by cameras and a rusted security bell. A single light flickered above the archway, casting just enough glow to make the place look haunted. I stepped inside. The woman at the front desk didn't look up. She had a clipboard, glasses perched low on her nose, and a voice as tired as the building. "I'm here to visit a patient," I said, steadying my voice. "Name?" she asked without looking. "Lena Marchand." That got her attention. She blinked, slowly. "Relation?" I hesitated. Then, "I'm her daughter." A longer pause. "She doesn't get visitors," the woman said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm here." She studied me for a second longer, then picked up a phone and dialed an internal number. After a murmured conversation I couldn't hear, she hung up and gestured. "Second floor, room 214. Don't stay too long." The hallway stretched forever. Every step echoed. I passed faded portraits, dusty sconces, and doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. The air smelled like antiseptic and sorrow. A nurse passed me without a word. Her eyes didn't even flick toward me. Room 214 was near the end of the hall. The door creaked when I opened it, and there she was. She sat by the window, thin, pale, her once dark hair now streaked with silver. She wore a gray sweater 2 sizes too big and white socks that didn't match. Her hands were folded in her lap. Still. Too still. She didn't turn when I stepped inside. "Lena?" I asked. She looked up. Her eyes met mine, and for 1 second, just one, I saw something flicker. Recognition, pain, maybe both. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away. I stepped closer, heart hammering. My voice broke. "My name is Callie. You had a daughter 18 years ago. They told me you couldn't take care of me, that you were unfit." She flinched, almost imperceptibly. "I know what they did to you," I said. "I know about Tressman. I saw the article. I saw the photo." Her hands clenched. "They still watch me," she whispered, voice thin and dry like paper. "They think I don't remember, but I do." I froze. She remembered. But who was they? Lena's eyes darted toward the corners of the ceiling. There were no cameras that I could see, but she stared like she knew exactly where they used to be. "They recorded our sessions," she whispered, "said it was for research, but it wasn't. It was surveillance. Control." Her breath caught. "I heard things, saw things. They tried to erase it, but some of us held on." I sat in the chair beside her, careful not to move too fast. "Who were they?" I asked. "Was it just Tressman?" She shook her head slowly. "Not no, not yes. More like a warning. They took you," she said. "They took my daughter. You weren't supposed to be adopted. He wasn't even on the list." I leaned forward. "He?" Her voice cracked. "George Monroe," she said. "He wasn't supposed to have access to you. He pulled strings. He got your file sealed. He used his foundation contacts. I tried to stop him, but by then, they'd already decided I was too dangerous." My stomach dropped. "Why?" I asked, barely a whisper. "Why go through all that?" Lena met my eyes, and this time her voice didn't waver. "Because you were evidence," she said. "You're living proof that everything I said was true." Lena's words hung in the air like a match waiting to be struck. You were evidence. The room around us felt too quiet after that. Outside the narrow window, wind stirred bare branches, scratching softly against the glass. The heater clicked and hissed, but Lena didn't flinch. Her gaze had gone hollow again, the way it must have so many times when no one listened to her. But I was here now. I was listening. "Evidence of what?" I asked, voice barely audible. She closed her eyes. For a moment I thought she'd shut down again. But then she spoke, low, deliberate, and with the cadence of someone who had memorized her own pain to keep it from being erased. "They were running trials," she said, "out of the Tressman Institute. They called them therapeutic interventions, but they weren't approved. Behavioral conditioning, drug combinations, sensory deprivation, memory suppression." I felt my stomach twist. "They used women like lab rats," she continued. "Women who couldn't fight back. Addicts, psychiatric patients. Some were committed by family members for convenience. Some were just inconvenient wives. Some were just loud." I stared at her. "You were loud." "I kept records," she whispered. "Too many records. I thought I was being cautious, but I wasn't discreet enough. When I confronted Tressman, I was told I was overworked, that I should take a leave of absence. I filed a formal complaint to the state board." She opened her eyes and met mine. "The next day, I was sedated and placed under psychiatric evaluation." I swallowed hard. They'd silenced her before her voice could reach the world. I reached into my coat and pulled out the folded article I'd printed at the library. Her face looked back at her, those defiant eyes in grainy newsprint. I found this, I said. They made it look like you lost control. They always do, she replied. I took a deep breath. Why me? Why take me? Lena looked toward the door. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because I documented everything. I recorded patient responses, treatment logs, even the side effects. I stored them in off-site backups in case something happened to me. She paused. Some of it referenced pregnancies. That stopped me. Pregnancies? Some patients, they were part of what Tressman called generational observation. He believed if trauma or behavioral conditions were treated, engineered, in utero, the results would be more permanent. He used hormonal therapies, tracked developmental milestones from infancy. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You were born in that facility, Callie, while I was being held. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. No, I said, I wasn't. I was adopted at 2. You were taken at 2, Lena said, but you were born during the trials. I fought to keep you with me. I documented everything, your birth, your early development, your reactions. They knew if I went public, you'd be proof, so they had me declared unfit. And then they took you. She exhaled sharply. And they gave you to one of their own. My throat was dry. George. Lena nodded. He wasn't on the adoption list. He wasn't qualified. But he had power. He was funding Tressman's foundation under another name, Monarch Initiative. He used his connections to close your file, seal your birth certificate, reassign your identity. I felt sick. All those times he'd talked about structure, about discipline, about how lucky I was to be given another chance. I thought it was just cold parenting, detached fatherhood, but it was more than that. It was intentional conditioning. I gripped the armrest of my chair. Did they test on me? Lena's face contorted, not in uncertainty, but in pain. I don't know. I wasn't there. After they moved me to Ridgeview, I wasn't allowed updates. No photos, no visits. I didn't even know if you were alive until now. My hands trembled, but they could have. Yes, she said, her voice brittle. And if they did, it's in the files, somewhere. A knock at the door made us both freeze. A nurse peeked in, smiling politely but thinly. Everything okay in here? I nodded quickly. Just finishing up. The nurse left, but the spell had been broken. Lena's posture changed. Her back straightened, her eyes dulled. She had returned to her shell. I stood slowly, pulling the article and my notes back into my coat. I'm going to find out what they did, I told her. I'm going to find the records, the proof. I'll expose them. Her hand shot out, gripping mine. Don't trust anyone with a badge, she whispered, or a lab coat, or anyone who uses the word wellness with a smile. I nodded, trying not to cry. You shouldn't have come, she added, a tremor in her voice. If they know you're here, they won't stop me, I said. You sound like me, she said with a weak smile. That's what scares me. I left Ridgeview just as the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of copper and ash. My breath fogged in the cold, but my blood was boiling. I wasn't adopted, I was absorbed, reassigned, placed into a life built by the very people who silenced my mother. Everything I thought I knew, my name, my family, even my memories, was a construct. And the man who sat at the head of our dinner table, the man who made me say thank you when he paid for shoes I didn't ask for, that man had orchestrated the theft of my life. Back at the Glen Ridge Motel, a rundown place with cracked wallpaper and a skeleton key that barely turned, I pulled out my notebook and started writing. I wrote down everything Lena told me. The name of the foundation, Monarch Initiative, the experimental pregnancies, the forced separations. I circled one word over and over again. Proof. If I was going to expose them, I needed more than memories. I needed documentation, names, footage, medical files, and I needed someone who could help me leak it without getting both me and Lena killed. But who? I thought back to the article. There had been a name, someone who quoted Tressman's team back in 2007, a journalist named Melanie Trask. I opened my laptop and started searching. She hadn't published anything in over a decade. No LinkedIn, no Twitter. Just a dead email address and one archived interview about being blacklisted after pursuing an unauthorized psychiatric abuse story. I copied her name into my list. If she was still alive, I'd find her. And if she wasn't, I'd do it alone. Then I remembered something. Before I left Ridgeview, Lena said something else, almost too soft to catch. She said, "They didn't just take you from me. They made you into something they could control." I thought she meant emotionally, but now, sitting alone in this motel room, I realized she might have meant something far darker. The motel room walls felt closer that night. I sat cross-legged on the squeaky mattress, the notebook open in front of me, covered in scribbles and timelines, connections I couldn't yet prove but felt in my bones. The heater hissed inconsistently. My fingers were stiff from the cold. I didn't trust turning the lights all the way on. Every flicker from the lamp felt like it might reveal something I didn't want to see. My mind kept circling back to Lena's last words. They made you into something they could control. What did she mean by that? Was it about George? The way he raised me like a project? Was it deeper? Something in my body, my blood? And worse, was I the only one? At 2:14 a.m., I hit a thread that changed everything. I was scrolling through an obscure Reddit page, one of those dead forums where people post anonymously about government cover-ups, lost siblings, secret files. I almost skipped it until I saw the headline, Tressman Institute. Does anyone remember the Marchand case? It was posted 5 years ago. The account was deleted, but the replies were still there, dozens of them, conspiracy theories, scattered memories, and then one comment that stopped my breath. I used to work at Tressman. I remember her. She wasn't crazy. She was right. They shut her up. User @RBCalderon. I copied the username and ran it through every site I could. Nothing official came up. No LinkedIn, no Twitter. But on Facebook, there was a profile, Ruby Calderon. No posts. Just photos of a cat, a few likes on old gardening pages, and one comment from a friend under a picture from 2012. Still working nights at Ridgeview? Poor thing, that place is haunted. The next morning, I sent her a message. "Hi Ruby, you don't know me, but I think you knew my mother. Her name is Lena Marchand. I met her at Ridgeview. She's alive, and I believe everything she tried to tell the world. Please, if you remember anything, if you have anything, I need your help. They buried her. They buried the truth. I want to dig it up." I didn't expect an answer, but one came 2 hours later. "Meet me. Back entrance of Ridgeview. Midnight. Don't let anyone see you. If they do, say you're lost." The wind howled through Glen Ridge that night. Sharp, icy, knifing through my jacket like it wasn't there. The town was silent. Not dead, not sleeping. Just holding its breath. Midnight at Ridgeview felt different than daytime. The building loomed like it had grown taller, heavier with secrets. The trees outside snapped in the wind. No cars in the lot. No lights on inside. I followed the gravel path around the side, past the utility shed, to the old rusted door marked maintenance. It creaked open before I could knock. Ruby Calderon stood there, still in scrubs. Gray cardigan wrapped around her, her hair tied back in a loose bun. Up close, she looked older than her photos, but not in years. In weight, like she carried too many memories. "You came," she whispered. "I had to." She looked both ways, then pulled me inside. The hallway was narrow, the bulbs overhead flickering. Old paint peeled from the walls. We passed a staff room, a rusted water fountain, a corkboard with faded notices. She led me into a storage closet, tiny, cramped, lined with metal filing cabinets and dusty boxes. She locked the door behind us. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said, voice low. "But I saw what they did to your mother, and when that other girl came around, I thought, maybe someone will finally listen." I froze. "Other girl?" She nodded. "Years ago, maybe 6, 7. Journalism student. Said she was investigating the Tressman Foundation. Bright. Persistent. Her name was Claire something? Claire Rothman?" I asked, the name spilling from my mouth before I realized why it sounded familiar. Ruby's eyes widened. "Yes. You knew her?" "No, but I read something. She tried to expose them, didn't she?" Ruby pulled open a file drawer and handed me a manila envelope. She was close. She came back for a second visit. Said she had proof, then she vanished. Her roommate said she was scared, thought she was being followed. Police ruled it a voluntary disappearance. But you don't believe that. Ruby looked at me long and hard. Claire was scared, but she wasn't the running kind. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were printed pages, notes, names, a photograph of Lena in her lab coat annotated in red ink, photocopies of patient forms, each marked experimental in block letters, handwritten notes that looked like they were scribbled in panic, and at the bottom, a USB drive taped to the inside flap. Ruby watched me. "It's video," she said, "taken from old security backups, before they wiped the archives." "What's on it?" "Sessions. The ones they didn't show the state board." She paused, her hands clenched. "Your mother wasn't mentally unstable. She was angry, she was loud, and that scared them more than anything." Back at the motel, I didn't sleep. I didn't breathe until I'd connected the USB to my borrowed laptop and copied everything to a secure drive. There were dozens of files. Some were labeled with patient codes, others with dates, some were corrupted, but two played. The first opened on a room dimly lit, a woman strapped to a chair, her mouth slack, her eyes glazed. A man's voice, off-screen, asked softly, "Do you believe we're here to hurt you?" The woman mumbled, "No, you're helping me." Another voice, "Good, helping you forget, helping you get better." The woman nodded slowly, her head lolled to one side. The man stepped into frame. It was grainy, but I recognized him from a photo buried in a foundation pamphlet. Dr. Miles Tressman. The second file played Lena, younger, stronger, her voice sharp, angry. "You can't keep doing this. These women haven't consented. You're sedating them into compliance." A voice off camera. "Lena, this is a review process. Let's stay professional. You're a coward," she snapped. "And when this breaks open, you'll burn with the rest of them." The video cut off, but the image lingered. Lena, furious, determined, and very, very sane. I sent the video to 3 encrypted backups. I knew now what I had. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was a war crime hidden behind a nonprofit logo. And George Monroe, my so-called father, was listed in one of the funding documents Ruby had included. Not just as a donor, as a director. I sat at the edge of the motel bed, my chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Every part of me trembled. They hadn't just taken me from Lena, they'd erased her, they'd silenced Claire, and now I knew they'd do it again if I got too close. But I wasn't going to run, I was going to burn it all down. The woman answered on the first ring. Her voice was low, careful, and not the least bit surprised. "How long have you had the footage?" I hesitated. "A day." Silence. Then, "Where are you?" "A town outside Glen Ridge. I'm staying low. Motel, cash only." More silence. Then a sigh that sounded like she was lighting a cigarette. "I've been waiting for this for 15 years. A town?" Her name was Rachel Ashby. Once a respected investigative journalist, now a ghost. At least to the internet. She'd been fired in 2009 for pursuing what her editor called an unverified delusion, a series of reports tying the Tressman Foundation to unethical psychiatric practices, suppressed patient records, and experimental corrections for women who were labeled unfit, disobedient, or emotionally deviant. Most of her work had never seen the light of day. One podcast had briefly mentioned her. Claire Rothman had cited her name in a now-deleted Twitter thread from 2016. That was all I knew, until now. I met her in person the next morning. She lived in a cabin 3 hours north, buried under pines thick as prison bars. No welcome mat, no mail, no cars in the driveway. Her directions were cryptic. No phones, no names. "Leave your ID behind, come alone." I did exactly as she said. Rachel opened the door before I knocked. 50s, tall, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a faded green sweater and no expression. The lines on her face looked earned, not aged. She didn't smile, She didn't invite me in. She just said, "Did you bring it?" I handed her the flash drive. She motioned me inside. The cabin smelled like old coffee and dry cedar. Stacks of binders, boxes of manila folders, and yellowing notebooks towered in the corners. A laptop sat on a table covered in sticky notes. An analog tape recorder rested beside a spiral notebook filled with dense handwriting. Rachel moved like she was still chasing deadlines. She plugged in the flash drive. Her eyes scanned the folder names. Patient Logs Foundation Memos Dar RH Private Evazila. When she opened the first video, she didn't flinch. She watched Lena's face flicker on screen. Then the voice off camera, Dr. Miles Tressman, saying, "Let's stay professional." Rachel paused, backed up, played it again. Then opened another file, one of the memos from Ruby. She read it silently, murmuring under her breath. These headers, the way they abbreviate patient categories, the approval stamps. This is how they write. This is how they catalog trauma. I watched her mouth tighten. You couldn't fake this if you tried. I sat across from her, hands in my lap, trying not to shake. Rachel looked at me for the first time. "You know what this is, right?" "Yes. You're not just risking your life. You're stepping into a war. These people, this foundation, they've bought hospitals, schools, police departments, politicians. They bury things before they bleed." I nodded. They buried Claire. Rachel nodded back, and they tried to bury Lena. We spent the next 6 hours sorting everything. Rachel moved fast. She duplicated the drive 6 times, each copy assigned to a different contact of hers, a former district attorney, a civil rights attorney in Chicago, 2 underground whistleblower networks, and 2 podcast producers who specialized in suppressed evidence. Each person would get a unique password. Each would receive it by courier or encrypted message. If one was compromised, the others could still launch. "This is how you kill a monster," Rachel said. "You starve it of secrecy." She drafted a timeline of Lena's case, cross-referencing it with foundation memos, confirming Lena had been targeted within 48 hours of filing her state complaint. She highlighted how George Monroe signed off on the reclassification of her patient logs as non-compliant behavioral data. "He didn't just adopt you," she said. "He neutralized a threat." My stomach turned. Rachel's expression softened for just a moment. "You were never their daughter. You were the evidence they needed to destroy." At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. It shouldn't have. No one had the number. I'd only turned it on for a second to sync a map, but the name lit up on the screen like a ghost rising from a grave. George Monroe. I stared at it. I didn't answer. Rachel looked up. "Do not engage." The voicemail came through 30 seconds later. I hit play on speaker. "Nora, I know what you're doing. I want to talk. You owe me that much." My hands went cold. He'd never called me that name before. Not once in 18 years. He knew. Rachel was already packing a bag. "We launch tomorrow," she said. "Full drop. Podcasts, articles, data leaks, videos. They can't shut it all down at once." She handed me one of the flash drive copies. "This one's yours. Hide it somewhere no one will find." I tucked it into the lining of my coat. George's voice echoed again in my mind. "You owe me that much." He didn't sound angry. He sounded certain. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire in Rachel's cabin, watching the flames flicker, trying to remember the last time I'd felt safe. Maybe never. I kept seeing Lena's face in the video, defiant, cornered, refusing to be erased. I saw Claire's name on a list, and mine. I wasn't just uncovering history. I was dragging it, kicking and screaming, into the light. The leak dropped on a Tuesday, not in one place, in 12. A podcast episode aired first, Rachel's voice introducing the world to Lena Marchand. Unfiltered audio followed. Then came the documents, scans of falsified files, internal memos signed by Tressman and George Monroe, a Dropbox link posted on Whistleblower forums, video clips clipped for maximum impact and shared by a dozen anonymous accounts on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. It didn't take long. By noon, Silver Birch, Lena Marchand, and Callie was evidence were trending. By nightfall, they had subpoenaed the Tressman Foundation. Within 48 hours, a formal state investigation was launched into the Monarch Initiative. The videos, especially the one with Lena in the chair, lucid, pleading, documented, were played over and over again on news cycles. Then came the class action lawsuits, call-ins from former patients' families, anonymous nurses and orderlies stepping forward, even former donors demanding answers. But all of it paled in comparison to the headline that shook me to my bones. George Monroe resigns from Foundation Board amid accusations. He hadn't just been outed, he'd been cornered. Ducks. Rachel kept me off the radar. We relocated twice in the first week. Burned phones, fake names, prepaid gas cards. My real name wasn't on anything. We even kept Lena in Ridgeview for now, until we could arrange legal extraction. The Foundation was in damage control mode, and we knew from experience, cornered predators bite hardest. And then, 5 days after the leak, he called again. I met George in an old train station turned cafe on the edge of nowhere. Public, cameras, witnesses, Rachel insisted. He wore his usual beige coat, hair brushed back, eyes calm. Like we were about to catch up after a business trip, not stand in the ruins of the life he built on lies. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked satisfied. "You've grown into a clever girl," he said. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't pretend you raised me out of love." His face twitched. The calm wavered. "You think this was simple?" he said. "You think I wanted this?" "No, I think you wanted control." Silence. Then a quiet nod. He folded his hands. "Everything you found, it's dangerous. Not just for me, for you, for Lena. If this goes further, people will get hurt." "They already have," I said. He leaned forward. "This doesn't have to end badly. You still have time to stop it." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I whispered, "It's already out." His face shifted. The calm peeled away. Something darker bled through. For the first time, I saw the man Lena had warned me about, cold, calculating, entitled. "This will destroy you too," he said flatly. "No," I replied, "it frees me." I stood. I didn't look back. The state sent agents to Ridgeview 3 days later. But by then, Rachel and I had already acted. With help from a sympathetic attorney, we'd arranged a court order to release Lena into protected care. Rachel pulled every string she had left. We arrived at Ridgeview with signatures, a medical van, and Nurse Ruby by our side. No alarms, no resistance. The staff had seen the news. They knew which way the wind was blowing. I found Lena sitting in the same window chair, her eyes fogged from another round of sedatives. I knelt beside her, took her hand gently. "Mom," I whispered. She blinked, slow, confused. "We're going." It took a second, but her fingers closed around mine. "You found me," she whispered. "I always would," I said, and we walked out of the place that tried to erase her, together. The weeks that followed were a blur. Lena entered intensive trauma therapy. Rachel became the face of the movement. Interviews, features, press conferences. But she always redirected the credit. None of this happens without Nora. We used that name now. My name. Not the one they gave me. Nora Marchand. The lawsuits exploded. Monarch folded. The Tressman Foundation lost 78% of its funding within a month, and George, he never called again. He was indicted 3 months later. Not just for the adoption fraud, but for conspiracy to suppress evidence, human experimentation, medical abuse, and more. His face, once stoic and untouchable, flashed across every news outlet in the country. I watched it in silence, sitting beside my mother, her hand in mine. But the biggest twist came on a cold morning in December. Rachel had just finished a podcast interview when her burner phone buzzed. She answered, froze, then mouthed 2 words. "It's her, Claire Rothman." She was alive, living under a false name in a town in Oregon, nervous, guarded, but breathing. She'd escaped after the second visit to Ridgeview, gone completely off-grid, terrified for her life. But when she heard the leak, when she saw Lena's name again, She knew the time had come. I flew out to meet her. We sat for 5 hours in a quiet diner off the highway. We didn't talk about what was lost. We talked about what we were going to build. A new foundation was born within the year, the Martian Project, a whistleblower protection network, a support line for survivors of psychiatric abuse, and an archive of every file we recovered, open access, never to be erased again. Claire ran the research division. Rachel trained new reporters. I worked operations. And Lena came in every Thursday to speak with women who had no one else to believe them. She didn't call herself a doctor anymore. She just said, "I'm someone who knows what it feels like to be told you imagined it all." Sometimes I still wake up sweating, still feel George's voice in the walls, still think someone's following me, but then I look around, at Lena sipping tea by the window, at Rachel laughing bitterly at an editor's rejection letter, at Claire holding up a box of new documents from a whistleblower in Kentucky. And I remember, they didn't just try to erase us, they failed. Pain has a strange way of sharpening your focus. The world becomes narrower, simpler. There's the throb of your pulse, the sting of each breath, and the single thought that loops through your mind like a mantra: don't drop the folder. I don't remember the sound of the second-story window shattering behind me as I leapt. I don't remember the scream that tore out of my own throat when I hit the gravel. But I remember the way the duffel bag full of documents, thousands of pages about the MEDUSA project, slammed against my chest as I curled around it like a child hugging a stuffed animal. My ankle twisted, my ribs cracked, my elbow was bloodied, but I didn't let go. They'd have to kill me to take it back. The night before, Melanie had decrypted an email. She'd been sifting through Betrayal Rothman's old online backups, an inbox long abandoned, buried under layers of dead links and broken encryption. But one message, dated September 13th, 2016, had a strange subject line. "If I'm gone, look here." It was unsigned, just a note. 3rd floor, back hallway, room 3B, storage closet, behind the false panel, St. Edda's. Patient files from Project MEDUSA. All of them. Originals, not digital. Betrayal Rothman was Claire Rothman's cousin, a tech security analyst. She had vanished 6 weeks after Claire. Everyone thought she overdosed. But now we knew better. So I returned to St. Edda's, alone. Ciel. I told Rachel not to come. I didn't even tell Lena. I slipped in at 2:30 a.m., climbed through the boiler room entrance, and found the 3rd floor corridor with nothing but a phone flashlight and the ache of adrenaline in my chest. Room 3B was exactly as Betrayal said, just storage, full of rusted metal cabinets and faded linens. But behind the far shelf, screwed into the drywall, was a panel that didn't quite match. I pulled it loose with a wrench I'd stolen from the maintenance closet. Behind it, a black binder, thick, heavy, labeled only with 3 letters, MEDUSA. Inside, full legal names of female patients, original psychiatric evaluations, many showing no signs of mental instability, consent forms forged or unsigned, dosage logs, video transcripts, session records that included names like Tressman, Monroe, and Dr. Halverson, and one final addendum, Asset Integration Protocol, Infant Series. My name was on the 2nd page. That was the moment the flashlight behind me turned on. The guard wasn't one I recognized. He didn't yell, he just radioed someone and stepped toward me. I ran. I knew that corridor, knew the side stairwell with the broken door, knew the landing where the 2nd-story window had no bars. I kicked it open and leapt. I wasn't brave, I was desperate. When I woke up, Melanie was sitting beside my bed with an ice pack and a face like she'd aged 10 years in one night. "You almost died," she said. "I didn't," I replied, pushing the binder toward her. "But this will kill them." She opened the folder slowly. Read one page, then another. Her hands began to tremble. "We're going to burn their entire world down," she whispered. The podcast dropped 3 nights later. It was a special emergency release from Behind the Veil. an investigative podcast known for tackling corruption, usually in politics or big pharma. But this one was different. It was called Episode 73, The Women They Tried to Forget. It was 92 minutes long. It began with my voice. My name is Callie Marchand. But that's not the name they gave me. I was born inside a psychiatric facility. My mother was a whistleblower. She was silenced. I was taken. This is what they did. Then came the evidence. Audio from Lena's unredacted sessions. Footage of a patient, Claire's aunt, Jennifer Rothman, being drugged mid-sentence. A segment narrated by Melanie, explaining the chain of concealed foundations, front groups, and laundering of private donor funds, tracing back to Monarch Initiative, Tressman, and George Monroe. Then came the name of the project, MEDUSA, Memory Erasure, Drug Utilization and Suppression Algorithms. Melanie's voice cracked when she said it, but she didn't stop. By morning, it had over 5 million downloads. By evening, it passed 10, then 20. Celebrities reposted it. Politicians tweeted it with vague concern. Victims of abuse across the country shared their own stories. And then, most important of all, the silence broke. An anonymous Reddit user posted, "My sister was at Silver Birch. I remember the bruises. I remember the wellness team showing up in vans at night." Another wrote, "My mom was there. They said she had hallucinations. Turns out she was trying to report being assaulted by a doctor." Same name. Dr. T, a former intern at Tressman Foundation, DM'd Melanie directly. "I've seen these files. I didn't understand what they were. But I remember scanning documents for Project M." People began showing up outside St. Edda's, outside the old Tressman building, outside George Monroe's gated estate. The movement had no leader. It didn't need one. It had proof. Rachel, always the realist, stayed quiet in public. But I saw her smile, just once, when the Attorney General held a press conference announcing a federal investigation into medical conspiracy, child trafficking, and systemic abuse of psychiatric patients under nonprofit protection shields. The final blow came in a short statement from Judge Lydia Varner, the same one who had signed Lena's involuntary commitment 17 years ago. She said, "I was lied to, manipulated. Had I known then what I know now, I never would have signed that order. I owe Dr. Marchand and her daughter a personal apology, and the state owes them much more than that." Lena was released the next morning, not just with a form, with flowers, with apologies, with lawyers waiting to help, with press cameras that blurred her face at her request, with Nurse Ruby at her side, and with me standing beside her as she stepped into sunlight she hadn't felt since I was 2 years old. She didn't speak. She just took a deep breath and looked up. Her hands clenched, then relaxed. "I didn't think I'd make it out alive," she whispered. "You didn't just make it out," I said. "You won." The courthouse steps were lined with people before sunrise. Some held signs, others held each other. Many wore black with red ribbons, the color chosen by survivors of psychiatric abuse as a silent statement. And at the center of it all stood the reporters. National networks, podcast teams, independent journalists, even foreign press. Their cameras pointed not at the defendants, but at the doors. Waiting, watching. Because today wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Chat. Inside, the courtroom was wood-paneled, heavy with history. Dusty flags in the corners, an old brass clock that ticked too loudly. But the air itself crackled with something electric. The prosecution sat tall, backed by months of public momentum. The defense, paid for by what remained of Tressman's defunct network, looked polished, rehearsed, but worn at the edges. And George Monroe? He sat with perfect posture. A pale suit, a tie with blue stripes, a pair of glasses he didn't need, and a calm that made my skin crawl. He didn't look like a monster, he looked like someone's grandfather, which made it worse. Judge Halberd was known for being fair and unshakable. She reminded the jury to separate media from evidence. She instructed the crowd to stay silent or be removed. Then the trial began. Week 1, they laid out the files, digital logs, the leaked videos, the MEDUSA binder, patient records with falsified evaluations, ledger pages tracing donations from shell corporations straight to Monarch Initiative, all bearing Monroe's signature. Week 2, testimonies from medical staff, nurses, orderlies, one former board member who turned whistleblower. Then came Ruby. She stood tall, her voice shaking only once. She described the late-night sedations, the closed-door sessions, the woman who screamed for her baby for weeks before being transferred. She didn't name Lena. She didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew. Week 3. Claire Rothman took the stand, alive, defiant. She recounted her investigations, how she traced the first threads back to Lena Marchand, how she was followed, threatened, and forced into hiding, how Betrayal tried to protect the truth and died for it. She ended her testimony with a quiet, powerful sentence. The only thing worse than being forgotten is being silenced while you're still alive. The courtroom held its breath. And then it was my turn. I took the stand in a black suit, no makeup, no jewelry, my mother's old watch on my wrist. The defense attorney smiled too easily. He began with charm. "Callie," he said, "or should I call you Nora? That's your birth name, correct?" "Yes," I answered, "but I respond to both. They represent different parts of me." He nodded. "Of course. And which part of you is speaking today?" I leaned forward, the part that remembers everything. He tried to twist the narrative, suggested I was emotional, possibly unstable, traumatized. He cited my time in a hostel, my obsession with archived files. He even brought up the fall from the second story. I answered every question, calm, measured, deadly, until the prosecution finally said, "Miss Marchand, in your own words, what do you believe happened to you?" I looked at the jury, a teacher, a grandmother, a nurse, a young man barely older than I was. Then I looked at George. He didn't flinch, and I said, "I was not adopted. I was absorbed. I was removed from a woman who tried to expose a system designed to erase women like her. I was raised by the man who helped that system thrive, not to protect me, but to prove he could." You could hear the scratch of someone's pen stop. I continued. Every bedtime story I heard, every meal I ate, every act of fatherly guidance. It wasn't love, it was programming. They wanted to see if they could mold the child of a whistleblower into someone obedient, quiet, contained. But I wasn't obedient, I remembered. I looked straight at George. And now the whole world remembers too. The courtroom remained still for 3 long beats. Then a quiet sound, the shifting of a chair, a stifled sob. Judge Halberd tapped her gavel once, not to reprimand, just to bring breath back into the room. George took the stand 2 days later. He looked every bit the confident patriarch. He spoke calmly. He denied nothing, but justified everything. "We were pushing boundaries," he said. "We believed we could help people. In the 1980s, no one wanted to fund long-term mental health reform. We found a way. Controlled conditions, test subjects. We documented everything. It was clean, safe, supervised." The prosecutor leaned forward. "And the babies?" He paused. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. "They were part of a long-term integration initiative," he said. "We believed that early life intervention, if properly managed, could result in more stable adult outcomes. They weren't test subjects, they were proof." My stomach turned, and the jury saw it too. Week 6. Closing arguments. The prosecution recapped every lie, every broken woman, every dollar laundered. They ended by holding up the duffel bag that George had given me on my 18th birthday. They placed it on the rail. This is what he gave her: a bag and a lie. The defense tried to steer toward scientific progress. They mentioned ethics boards, gray zones, misjudged intentions, but they never mentioned love. or remorse, or humanity. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Outside, protests grew. Buses brought survivors from across the country, former patients, daughters, sisters, sons. Some held signs that read, "We remember. Justice for Lena. Callie is all of us." I didn't attend every day of deliberation. I stayed with Lena. She sat by the window, watching the news with silent intensity. Her hands no longer shook. Ruby came by every morning. Claire stayed nearby. Rachel fielded press. We were a circle now, a fortress. The verdict came on a Thursday. The hallway was packed shoulder to shoulder. I could barely breathe. The jury filed in. George Monroe and Miles Tressman both stood. The foreman's voice was clear. We, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all counts. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just looked at George one last time. His eyes found mine, still cold, still proud, but smaller now, like a painting left too long in the sun. The courtroom was silent when the judge read the final sentences. George Monroe, 55 years in federal prison without parole. Miles Tressman, 62 years, plus asset forfeiture of over $48 million. 2 others from the Monarch Board took plea deals. Lesser time, but full testimonies. The state of New York formally moved to dissolve all registered entities connected to the Tressman Foundation and its subsidiaries. It was the first time in decades that a trial involving medical experimentation and psychological abuse under nonprofit protection had ended in full conviction. It would not be the last. Outside, the street was packed. Former patients, their families, advocates, strangers who now felt connected to something larger. The signs weren't angry anymore, they were hopeful. Truth survived. Callie walked so others could run. Justice for the unremembered. But Callie, Nora, didn't stay for the press. She walked down the courthouse steps, Lena beside her, hand in hand. And she kept walking. Out of frame, out of the cycle, into something new. St. Etta Psychiatric Center was officially closed 1 week later. A state inspection team declared the facility unfit for any further use. The locks were changed, the patients transferred to new regulated institutions. The files, once buried in vaults beneath concrete, were uploaded, archived, protected. Callie and Lena didn't return for the closing, but they watched from a distance. In one drone shot aired on public television, you could see it clearly: the rusted gate, the cracked driveway, the crooked sign, and a single line of tape stretching across the front door like a final wound being stitched. No one would be forgotten in that place again, because no one would ever go back in. Chatsu. They moved north, just the 2 of them, to a lakeside town with misty mornings and quiet streets, where the leaves turned copper in fall, and the lake froze in long sheets of silver during winter, where they could breathe, where no one knew their story unless they chose to tell it. And even then, people didn't flinch. They listened. The house was old, but strong. 3 stories, white porch, garden overrun with weeds. Callie painted the front door red, the color of remembrance. They called it the Betrayal Foundation, a center for trauma recovery, a sanctuary for women who had survived systemic silencing, a place for those who had no name, no diagnosis, no language for what had been done to them. But Lena knew, and now she taught. The main hall had 7 rooms. Each was named after someone who had once been labeled unstable, non-compliant, or unfit. The Claire Room, where survivors met for group discussions, led by Claire Rothman herself. The Ruby Room, a clinic for wellness check-ins managed by Ruby Calderon. The Betrayal Room, a memorial space lined with candles, files, photos. The Marchand Room, a therapy space Lena returned to every Thursday. and 3 others for women who never made it out, but whose stories had been told. No signs, no fanfare, just a red door. People came. They always came. Some drove for hours. Some walked in shaking. Some didn't speak at all. Callie greeted them all the same way. This place was built from ashes. You're safe here. Some nights, when the wind howled against the windows and the fire in the hearth crackled low, Callie would sit with Lena and Rachel and Claire. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Survivors often speak best in silence. But on the night before the center's official opening, Callie slipped away, not far, just behind the house. To the old brick fire pit that came with the property. The stars were high, the trees still bare. She carried one thing with her, the duffel bag. The same one George and Victoria Monroe had slid across the carpet to her on her 18th birthday. Inside it now, the clothes she wore that day. A photo of the Monroes. A single sheet of paper that read, "Adoption finalized, sealed per directive." And the last letter George ever sent her, unopened. Callie looked at the bag for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She knelt, opened the fire pit's metal door, and lit the kindling. It caught quickly. The flames reached upward like a promise. She placed the bag into the heart of the fire, watched it burn. The fabric curled. The zipper turned red hot. The papers crisped and vanished into air. She didn't blink. Lena stepped outside minutes later, wrapped in a coat. She didn't ask. She just stood beside her daughter, hand brushing Callie's. The fire danced in their eyes. Callie said, low and steady, "They wanted me to be an object, a relic, a product of silence." She turned to her mother, "But I chose fire." Lena nodded once, neither spoke again. The night said enough. When Callie went back inside, a gust of wind blew sparks behind her. The last of the bag turned to dust, and in the darkness, over a black screen, just 7 words remained. Not all daughters are born, some are made. Reflection. This story isn't just about uncovering one person's truth. It's about what happens when a system is built to silence the inconvenient, and how long it takes for that silence to shatter. Callie, now Nora, represents all the voices that were labeled unstable, all the truths that were buried under funding and influence, all the daughters and sons raised on lies in the name of protection. Her fight was never just personal, it was generational. By reclaiming her name, her story, and her mother, she dismantled more than a network. She destroyed a legacy of control. And in its place, she built something better, something real. Let this be a reminder, the truth always leaves a trail. And no matter how carefully they try to bury it, someone will dig, someone will speak, someone will survive.